Okay. The first thing I'd like you to do is please silence your phones if you've got them. If you want to fiddle with them and post on media or anything, you're welcome to do that, but ringing is not okay. Okay. All right. We do that. And if you're new here today, welcome. We always appreciate extra fresh ideas, perspectives. It being October, I almost said fresh blood. Thank you for coming. If you would like, there are visitor cards in with the hymnals. And if you want to fill one of those out and drop it into the offering basket, then we can get back to you and say, hey, come again, So the UU Church, the Unitarian Universalist Church, is an open and tolerant place where diversity of thought is encouraged, sought, and appreciated. It doesn't matter who you love or how you identify yourself, you are welcome here. We come here because we want to think for ourselves. We think that a shared spiritual journey is better than a solitary one. We want to ask questions. We value the exchange of ideas. We want to hear from others, and we want to be challenged. There are a range of beliefs among those here. Generally, though, we believe in caring for the planet and caring for each other. We are a lay-led, this is foreshadowing. We were a lay-led ministry, which means that information and inspiration comes from all of us to each of us. Accordingly, your presence here adds to the atmosphere, and we are glad you are all here. Announcements. This is the announcement I foreshadowed. We have hired a minister. This is Kristen Famula, and she will be our part-time minister and remote minister primarily. She lives in Truckee, Nevada, California, just over the border with Reno to her east. And she'll be working with us part-time remote for the next year. She started last Sunday. She'll be joining us via Zoom and also in person occasionally. While most of the services she leads will be remote, she'll be joining us next Sunday, October 15th. She'll be in Ogden for that whole weekend. On Friday, there will be a Meet the Minister event from 7 to 9 p.m. right across the hall here. Okay. That's called Geneva Hall. Okay. Karen, do you still need help with that?
Probably one or two more appetizers and some drinks would be helpful.
So if you would like to help participate in that, Karen would welcome some assistance. Okay. Okay. One of our priorities for Kristen is to help us to get our religious education program up and going again. We need to kind of reimagine where we want to go from there with that. So Kristen has served as a religious educator for over a decade and will be helping us to figure out how to do this in our modern Zoom enhanced times. On the 15th after church in the library,
Saturday, October 14th.
Saturday at 2:00 in the library just down the hall a little bit, we will be having a reception with Kristen where people can, it's informal and you can have a chance to casually talk with one another there with her. Okay. We'd like to begin our service by lighting the chalice. Chris, could you come up and light the chalice for us? You'll find the words in your order of service. We light this chalice for the warmth of love, for the light of truth, and for the energy of action. Thank you, Chris. The topic today is on homelessness and mental health. So I have a few facts to present to you regarding that, some of which I lifted off of Wikimedia and some from the Ogden Standard Examiner. Historically, we are a nation of immigrants and refugees. Homelessness has always been with us. It became a national issue in the 1870s with the growth of the mega cities like New York. Into the 20th century, the Great Depression led to social upheaval, unemployment, and more homelessness. In the 1990s, the US Census Bureau estimated that the homeless population of the country was about 228,000 people, which was about 0.1% of the whole population. That estimate is widely considered to be very low. During the Great Recession in the early 2000s, the resulting economic stagnation and downturn have been major driving contributors to extending that growth in homelessness. According to the Standard Examiner, homelessness in Weber County isn't going away. It also is getting larger. While some figures indicate a forward movement in efforts to help the unsheltered, others' numbers released in an annual report by the Utah Office of Homeless Services suggests that there is backsliding in our own county. In releasing the report last Thursday, a state official noted that unstable housing situation in the state, as well as the decline in available federal funding for housing through COVID funds, has eased up. The funding has gone. Declining stints in shelters or transitional housing notwithstanding, a higher percentage of people who exit homelessness in Weber County are unfortunately finding themselves once again without a shelter. In 2022, almost 50%, 49.5% of people who experienced homelessness in the prior 2 years then found housing, were back out of housing once again. And people who are experiencing homelessness for the very first time, it's gone up in Weber County to 1,579 unsheltered people in our county. It's up. It's growing. So now I would like to introduce our speaker by talking about me. So quite a while ago, I came to Ogden and went to Weber State and graduated in psychology with great hopes of going out and solving a lot of the misery in the world. And I started working at the McAdee Hospital, where I discovered that I neither had the self-discipline or emotional stamina to follow that line of work. Fortunately, about this time, there was another young man moving to Ogden who apparently had that stamina and emotional strength. I was under a lot of stress, and I started taking yoga classes from a woman named June Moffat over at the Bertha Eccles Art Center. And about that time, this young man started teaching Kundalini yoga over at the Bertha Eccles Art Center. I eventually moved to 27th Street, about a couple of blocks below Fillmore, and he moved to 27th Street eventually, a couple of blocks above Fillmore. You started out below and then moved up. So sort of parallel lives in a way. I went on to a career teaching children with disabilities, and Sat Mandir went down and worked with people with mental issues and who were unsheltered, often unsheltered. So kind of a parallel but separate path. We both had occasions to meet with a guy named, or at least work in the vicinity of a guy named Wally Dally, which was kind of an interesting thing. So, Suzanne, do you want to say anything about Sat Mandir?
Yeah, I can do it from here. I've known Sat Mandir for some time, and we played golf together one summer, and you always knew Sat Mandir was on the golf course. Unlike most people, you know, the barn was a little rolling, and you could see his turban going up and down. So I always knew that was Sat Mandir. But what strikes me about you, Sat Mandir, is that, you know, with him, it's what you see is what you get. And he's like a tall drink of water. And I said this to Harimandir, his wife, and she said to me, that's what you get when you meditate, you know, every day.
So Sat Mandir will speak, and then at the end, where we normally have our moment of silence, he will lead that. Okay.
Well, they wanted me to give a little bit of information about how I got into mental health. So I did my yoga teacher training down in Phoenix, and I moved here were people from the mental health center, not clients, but the staff, and they really liked it. So they convinced my wife and I that once a week we should have clients come over and do yoga. These were what you call SPME clients, severely and persistently mentally ill folks. These are people that have a disability income based on their mental health disability. So they're, you know, pretty disabled folks. So they would come over and they do a yoga class once a week, and they seem to like it, some of them, not all of them. But at that time, there was no mental health center per se. It was kind of an itinerant situation. The mental health facility would move from place to place and all around. It didn't have its settled situation like it does now. So that my house was one of the places they'd come. They'd go bowling and do all these different things. But my house was one of the places they'd come and they do yoga. So, and I enjoyed that process, and I kind of like working with those folks. And eventually that evolved into where I was going to for a short period of time. The mental health center moved into the exchange, you know, down the stock exchange, down where I guess there's like Rooster's Bee is down there, and the distillery and all that kind of place. So back then there wasn't much. There was a bunch of cows still. So it wasn't the best smelling place to have a mental health center. But I would go there once a week, and I would teach these same folks the yoga. And that, you know, like I said, I enjoyed it. So I ended up going and getting my master's degree, because in mental health, you pretty much need a master's degree to do anything that's fun. So I went and did that, and then came back, and then I could teach. Then I started to work down at We Were Human Services. By this time, they did have a stable situation, a big building and stuff. So I taught there, and so that was really enjoyable. So that's how I got into it, is kind of through the back door, so to speak. And when I did my master's degree, I did my thesis on using Eastern techniques in mental health. And at that time, that was kind of new. Now it's kind of old hat now. A lot of the major therapeutic techniques involve mindfulness, and they've discovered that yoga is actually one of the best ways to deal with physical trauma, sexual trauma from the past, because it helps heal the physical where a lot of the trauma is held. But back then, that wasn't the case. So I did my thesis on that, and my advisor said, you have like 30 years worth of research you could do here, which I wasn't really that interested in doing, but other people have done that. And it's like, but they were still locked up. They were still stuck in these big hospitals. Is the medications, and they realized we don't really have to have these people in hospitals anymore. So they said, well, let's put them on medication. We'll create this robust community mental health system. And so we'll take care of these folks out in the community. They'll be on these medications, and they'll have, people to help them out and this and that, but they'll have their freedom. They will not be locked into a facility. So they let people out, and it was a one-way street, because they not only let folks out, they also knocked down the buildings. So there was, if it didn't work, there was no place for them to go back to. They don't have huge state hospitals anywhere in the United States anymore. So what happened was Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan did not like social workers, and he made that really clear. So one of the factors that contributed to the homelessness of the mentally ill was that robust community mental health went away. It was gone, right? So that was one factor that created a lot of correspondence between being mentally ill and being homeless, because there was not that robust community mental health anymore because of the lack of funding. Then, so that was sort of stage one. Then in the 90s, 96 actually, we had what was called welfare reform. And when I started working at mental health in 1993, and at that time, it was fairly easy to get your disability. And sometimes clients didn't even know. Their doctors would just fill out all the paperwork and get them to sign something, and lo and behold, they'd have this disability check coming, and they didn't even know how it happened. But in 1996, what they did was they said that you could not be on welfare for more than a certain amount of time. I believe it was 2 years, 24 months. And this was over your lifetime. It wasn't like 2 years straight. It was over your lifetime. So what happened was the backlog on these applications for disability just skyrocketed. Instead of, sometimes getting your disability in a couple of months, it never took less than 2 years. Never. And so here these folks are, they are not getting treatment a lot of the times, and because they don't have their disability. They don't have their disability. It's not been okayed yet. So in conjunction with that, at least in our place in Weber County, we went to a Medicaid HMO system. So we were the HMO for mental health for those people with mental illness, but you had to have Medicaid. Now, at first, we just kind of slid around that, and we took still just took care of it. Everybody would come in, you give them, the care that they need. But then Medicaid says, hey, they somehow figured out, I'm not sure how it did. They do a lot of audits. They get government funding to do a lot of audits. So I'm sure it was still another audit. They figured out that we were taking care of people that were not on Medicaid. So they said, for every person that we take care of that's not on Medicaid, we're going to take away X amount of dollars. So as a business model, that didn't really work very well for us. So that meant that we couldn't take care of those folks. So they ended up, again, in the community with no treatment. So one of the things that's important to realize, is that, well, how do we get the mentally ill to be equipped?
This microphone keeps shutting off. I'm just going to use the microphone right here. Just keep speaking as you were.
All right. So one of the things about the mentally ill is that everybody here is unique, right? We're all unique individuals, but most of us at least take a shot at trying to fit in, right? We try to fit in, and some with more success than others. Now, the mentally ill, some of them just don't care to fit in. And some of them, when they try to fit in, it doesn't go very well. So there's more uniqueness and individuality amongst the mentally ill clientele. So the approach to housing people is going to vary from person to person. So I'm just going to go over a few examples. I take the diagnosis schizophrenia, right? Everybody has some idea in their head what a schizophrenic is. Somebody with a split personality, which has nothing to do with schizophrenia. It's the way you translate that word, but it really has nothing to do with the diagnosis. There's this diagnosis called disorganized schizophrenia. And those folks, their minds are they're just out. It's just really hard to track them. Like when you're doing therapy with somebody with disorganized schizophrenia, it's really hard to keep track about what's going on. And they're having that same difficulty. So with those folks, helping them to get housing means a massive input of probably not therapy. You can't talk somebody into going out and figuring out how to get a house, but you're going to have case management, because that's what I had. One client, you guys know where the Millstream Motel used to be? Well, this guy lived in the Millstream Motel for years and years and years, and it was very expensive. I'm not super expensive, you can imagine, but it was fairly expensive. And even after it was condemned, he still lived there and he still paid. And there was somebody had a scam going, I think. I would go visit him at this condemned hotel, which is gone now. And it was like a complete disaster. I mean, there was no amenities whatsoever. He didn't have hot water. I'm not sure he even had water, period. But there was it was just this complete dive. But because he had this disorganized schizophrenia, that housing that had worked pretty well before it was condemned, and it had running water and all those things, he couldn't move. He couldn't figure out how to get from there to someplace else. So it took probably a couple of years, but finally, it wasn't me that convinced him, despite my best efforts. Didn't work at all. But we had this sort of case manager, and she had this sort of motherly, demanding approach to him, and she got him to move. And it was the best thing that ever happened to him. Not only was it so much, but he moved to 3 Links Tower, across from the library. Not only was it way, way better, but it was cheaper. But that housing, his disorganized approach to life meant that the housing was critical, but at the same time, it was very difficult for him to figure out how to go from this condemned housing that cost a lot to a decent place that didn't cost much. He never did figure out how to, we bought him several cell phones, he could never figure out how to use a cell phone. So we always had to go visit the guy in person because he never knew how to answer his phone. But then there's paranoid schizophrenia. Now, paranoid schizophrenia is completely different. Those people hear voices and they have a very elaborate scheme, and it often involves paranoia, people being out to get them. So what happens in a paranoid schizophrenic situation is you end up, they'll take the covers off of the electric outlets and they'll cover them all up, and they'll just take down some light bulbs because they think, the voices are coming through the lights. And so you can imagine that doesn't go over very well with landlords when they go visit the house and all the wires are hanging out of the wall and stuff. So that's just one diagnosis, right? Then you have some people with high anxiety will solve their anxiety by holding on to stuff, right? They're hoarders. And if you don't have a lot of money, the stuff that you hoard can be pretty sketchy. So I can't tell you how many times I would go to clients, the landlord or whoever or the manager of the place would call me up and say, this such and such, we can't get into the house. So I'd have to go over and convince these persons that they could survive without this, that, or the other thing. And sometimes that worked, and sometimes I'd be back a week later. So that's another aspect, is that hoarding thing, that anxiety thing. A person that's depressed, right? What do? Nothing, right? So finding and maintaining housing is very difficult with somebody that's severely depressed. But it's not the same as with the paranoid person. It's a whole different kettle of fish. Then you have approximately 50% of people with mental illness have a substance abuse problem. Several reasons. There's a lot of hypotheses out there. Some people feel like it's self-medicating and makes some of the symptoms go away. For others, it's the medications people take for, most of the medications people take are very sedating, and they also put on weight. So methamphetamines, that's a good antidote to that situation. And it's actually not so illogical. So you have the substance abuse issue. That often doesn't go well with landlords either. I had one of my clients, he was probably the funniest person I've ever met in my life. So he calls me up and tells me this wild story about how he was cooking meth, and he lived on the second floor of an apartment. And he's cooking meth on the floor. He says, and he almost burned a hole in it. The story was hilarious, but he almost burned a hole in the floor. And in this particular case, he didn't. So he just put a rug over the top of it, and the landlord never found it. But he did eventually get kicked out because in order to sustain his drug habit, he just had friends stay with him, and they would either bring drugs or they would give him money to stay there. And of course, he was on housing, and there's a lot of really strict rules if you're on housing, a lot of stuff, and he wasn't paying attention to any of them. So he got kicked out of several places. But so substance abuse is a totally different problem that creates issues for homelessness. Another of my clients used to get drunk, really drunk, because he only drank hard liquor. And he lived up at St. Benedict's Manor, which is that was actually the place that I always recommended that my clients try to get into, because it's kind of peaceful up there and it's not downtown. But anyway, he was up at St. Benedict's Manor, and he used to always, when he got really drunk, he'd open the window, and he was like 6'5". He was a big guy, and he would start yelling at people in this really loud voice, and he would just swear up and down. So that didn't go over too well either. And he eventually got kicked out. So substance abuse is another substantial problem for people with mental illness in terms of their ability to hang on to housing. And then the other main thing, I have no idea how long I've been up here, so. So the other big issue is personality disorders. And in those cases, it's always the relationship issues that would impede their ability to maintain or find housing. And there's lots of different types of personality disorders. They're not all the same, but they all eventually come down to how do you get along with people? How do you perceive people? Like avoidant personality, they don't want to talk to people. Difficult to get a place if you can't talk to people. If you're afraid to get on the phone and talk to somebody and you don't have housing, it's hard to make that happen if you won't do it, if you're afraid to do it. Borderline personality, which was actually my specialty, their main problem was this extraordinary volatility. They would go off on somebody in a flash. And that could be one of, there's several different ways that could impact your housing. One would be a lot of people with mental illness can't afford to have a house or even an apartment by themselves. So you'd have they would have a partner, and that wouldn't go well oftentimes with personality disorders, because they just start yelling at one another, and sometimes it involved knives and things like that. And so, because it was just this impulsive stuff. Another story about, and this was about two of my clients, both my clients, that was just coincidence. Both of them had borderline personality, and they were and they came in one time, and they didn't even know one another. As they came in and said, "Oh, we're best friends." These are two females. We're best friends now. And I was thinking, oh God. And sure enough, it didn't take but 2 weeks when they were in the same place, and somebody did something wrong with the keys. And so the police ended up involved because somebody pulled a knife. One of them pulled a knife. And these are just really not like dangerous looking people or anything. They're just really impulsive. So they're yelling at another. One of them pulls a knife. The police show up. And the police were really cool about it. They said, they kind of talked them down, but the one person would not let go of her knife. So they kind of talked them down, and so the police finally says, well, they were not going to do anything. They were just going to leave. They have the one person go back to her apartment. So they asked this person, I think everything is okay now, right? You guys can get along. So what do you think the answer was? No. She ends up in jail with a felony charge because she had the knife in her hand, and she had every opportunity to just say yes. That's all it would have taken, but that impulsive no. So personality disorders are a completely different problem in terms of maintaining housing. So overall, it takes quite a bit of financing and it doesn't necessarily, you don't have to necessarily be a therapist to make, to help people connect with housing, but there does have to be a robust approach to case management. People that know the community, people that know how to, these people can be very confusing. So it takes some training. You can't just probably, like even doctors have a hard time understanding the severely mentally ill. They treat them like they're stupid. And a lot of times they're not stupid at all. Like a person with paranoid schizophrenia is smarter than most of us because they are maintaining a reality that is not supported by facts. Our reality is supported by facts. We don't have to do that much effort, but they have to be really smart to keep their reality going. So it's not a lack of intelligence. It's a lack of just that ability to go from A to B, where B is housing. B is a housing that you can afford and that you can maintain. And it takes a robust case management approach. And we don't really have that right now. Medicaid expansion did help. When we had Medicaid expansion, of course, it took Utah several years and a voter referendum to make it happen, because everybody in the whole country could have expanded Medicaid, and the federal government would have paid for 100% of it the first year. And then it went down 2% every year after that, but it only goes down to 90%. So that the state the maximum the state has to pay for Medicaid is 10%. But of course, Utah didn't do that because I'm not sure why. And then, because that's a big help, because that provided more funds after we did expand Medicaid, that it provided more funds to do more case management type things. So one of the areas that the funding is coming from at Weber Human Services now is Medicaid expansion, because those folks, that solves that problem that began in 1996, because with Medicaid expansion, you get services just by being poor. And a lot of people with severe mental illness are poor. But before that, you had to have a verified, total disability, and that process that I said took a minimum of 2 years. But with Medicaid expansion, you were eligible for some of these services without having to go through that process. Because you think about it, if you have a severe mental illness, having the perseverance to go through a 2-year process is it's hard for anybody. But for somebody that's severely depressed, schizophrenic, bipolar, or whatever, it's really, really difficult. So having the Medicaid expansion is a big help. I'm hoping it will help alleviate the problem a little bit. But I think that one of the keys is to just have people involved with this process that understand the complexity of having them, how complex life is if you have a severe mental illness. And so they have that compassion. Because a lot of times when you're trying to help somebody with a severe mental illness, they do things that are completely, by our perspective, irrational. Why would they do that? They're deliberately screwing up their housing. So you get mad and you say, I'm not going to help anymore. So the key is to have people that are trained to recognize that they need to help, and that even though they make horrendous mistakes that you wouldn't make, they still deserve to have the help. So that uniqueness of recognizing the uniqueness of the mentally ill, I think, is an important component of connecting the mentally ill with homes. Like I said, they're very, very unique, fascinating individuals. One of my favorite clients, by this time she's probably 60 years old, and she'd had a fascinating life. But she had bipolar disorder her whole life, and it just kind of got worse after she had brain cancer. So, or her depression part got worse after brain cancer. But she's just this unique person, and so I was really gratified to me to help this person get housing, which she did actually, because she had a lot of grit herself. But she introduced herself, and this was an example of the uniqueness of the mentally ill. She introduces herself to me just right out of the box, first session. I'm a nymphomaniac. It's just like none of us would say that, regardless of our sexual proclivities. But it was not, it's just kind of what she did. It just was who she was, or who she had been. But anyway, I think so that the important, in terms of connecting the mentally ill to their housing, it's important to first connect to them where they're at with the proper amount of resources, which, like I said, it's problematic, but Medicaid expansion can hopefully help with that in terms of bringing that robust response to the situation. Anyway, I think my 20 minutes are up. So
You're going to lead us in another.
So now we're going to do a meditation. Now what I'm going to do, we're going to do like 3 minutes of just a little very basic breathing meditation. And then I'm going to, while you guys are in a blissful meditative state, I will just tell 2 really short stories for you. Okay. So what you can do is you're going to sit straight. Your eyes are closed. And you're just going to pay attention to your breath. You're going to feel the breath go in through your nose and out through your nose. And as you inhale, you're going to drop your diaphragm so your abdomen will push out a little bit. And as you exhale, your diaphragm will push back up. And totally, when your mind wanders off, just bring it back to the breath. Two monks were taking a long walking journey from one monastery to another. It was a blustery, kind of rainy day. They were walking along and just having this very meditative walk. And they come to a river, and the river was swollen, and there was a lot of water. It looked pretty iffy crossing the river, and at the river was this beautiful young woman, and she said that she was not able to cross the river. It was flowing too hard for her. So one of the monks picks the girl up and walks her across the river, puts her down, and the 2 monks walk on. So they're walking, and several hours later, as they approach the monastery that they were heading to, so the one monk says to the other, "You know, it's against the rules to touch a woman." And the monk that had picked the woman up said, "I put that woman down a long time ago." One more story, one more shorter story. Man was walking through the woods, and a great big tiger comes running after him. So he runs and he runs and he runs and he leaps over this cliff and he grabs onto a branch. He's holding onto the branch, trying to figure out how he's going to get down the rest of the way to the cliff. He looks down, and there's another huge tiger down there, just licking its chops. He looks up, and there were two mice nibbling at the roots of the plant that he was holding on to. Then he looks over and he sees a couple of strawberries. He reaches out, grabs the strawberries. How sweet the taste. That's it.
Wow. Thank you, Sat Mandir. So, I believe we're now going to call for the offering. Candles first, candles and stones. Okay, so it is our custom to come up if you would like and light a candle of caring, of concern, of hope, of uplifting. And if you would like to take a stone and drop a burden, something from your past, drop something you wish to be rid of into the water. If you would just come up to the front, go back down the sides. Thank you. I'd like now to call for an offering. All rise and turn towards the center, offering word of service. Thank you. We promise to use this to further the work of the church and to do it in the world. Now, if you'll remain standing, we'll have our final song, hymn of the day, and that is. And I've lost it.
323.
323, break not the circle in your gray hymnal. Service, I'd like to ask Chris to come back and distinguish chalice. The words for this ritual are in the order of service.
We extinguish its darkness, but not the warmth of love, the light of truth, the energy of action.
Thank you. This concludes our service. There will be a nice postlude for you. And then across the way, we can meet and chat over coffee with the Presbyterian.